Hello, welcome to our worship facility webinar, Church Threat Assessment, Strategies for Identifying and Mitigating Risks. I'm worship facility editor, Gene Lance. Our guest today is Simon Osamoh, noted author and church security expert.
Well, thank you for joining me on this worship facility webinar. I'm really excited to take you through the subject of threat assessment. And I must get between 5 to 10 calls a week from churches reaching out across the US saying, Simon, how do we create a threat assessment team? What is the best way to us to manage a threat that might come into our house of worship? And how do we resolve that in a safe manner? So I'm going to take you through a step-by-step process in this webinar that you can implement today to make sure that your house of worship is not only considering threats that are coming in, but making sure that you have a robust program. I'm a big person of we need a program behind everything that we do so things are sustainable and then we can move forward. So let's first look as to what the title is of this presentation. So we're going to cover church threat assessment, strategies for identifying and mitigating risk being the key point here. Now, before we start, let's get into a few myths around threat assessment. So I get a lot of people say, well, Simon's violence is unpredictable. These people just snap. So why do we even try? There's no way to prevent violence. So what can we do anyway? Should we even create a threat assessment team when we can't prevent violence? Or violence is a mental health problem, Simon. It's not just the church. Everyone needs to be concerned about mental health. So why should we start a threat assessment team? Or, well, Simon, we're just a small church. We have 50 people in our congregation. We don't have the resources to create a threat management team. So I'm a person who likes to work in absolutes. So let's look at the right-hand side. Let's look at the facts. Well, these perpetrators do not just snap. When mass violence occurs, never do they just snap. There is a pathway to violence that these perpetrators go through, and we're going to cover a bit of that within this webinar. Now, there are always pre-behaviors before any violent act. We believe that God created us and he gave us emotions, he gave us feelings, and he gave us behaviors. And it's those pre-incident behaviors that tell us when someone is escalating to the point of action, and we can always see those before. We might not see them at the time, but those pre-behaviors are always there. And someone says, well, there's violence is a mental health problem. There's nothing that we can do. There's many stressors outside of mental health that are causing these mass shootings. Yes, mental health is a key component, but there's many stressors that are leading these people on the pathway to violence. And if someone says, well, Simon, we're a small church, well, start with one person. Every church safety team that I know of, every church security program started with one person saying, I'll go first. So perhaps today you are that person that's going to say, I'll go first. Now, what is the goal of this webinar? I'm going to give you a step-by-step guide to starting a threat management program. So the slides aren't necessarily pretty. There's not lots of pictures. There's a lot of text. And if you stick around to the end, I'll tell you how you can get access to the slide deck. But there's going to be a lot of text to go through, but it's going to really help you start your threat assessment program. So I'm going to teach you step by step as to how to start this program. So a little bit about me before you start, because some people might not have come across me before, but I have 2 Amazon best-selling books. On the left-hand side, I have 10 powerful strategies for conflict de-escalation. And on the right-hand side, as I look at the screen, we have Securing Church Operations, which is my 7-step plan for church ministry and safety leaders, of which one of those steps is about starting a church safety committee, a risk management committee, or a threat assessment team, whatever you choose to call it. So I am an Amazon best-selling author. A bit of my background. So I served 14 years in the UK police as a detective, investigating organised crime and terrorism. I had the honour and the privilege to work with the British security services on the liquid bomb terrorism plot in 2006. Now, when I first emigrated here to the US in 2011, it was to head counterterrorism at Mall of America, Minnesota. Now, depending where you are in the US, you may not have heard of Mall of America, but it's North America's largest retail and entertainment complex. It's around 6.5 million square feet. It has over 42 million visitors per year. It's actually larger than Disney because it's free to get in. It has a theme park in there. And there I was head of counterterrorism, overseeing our liaison with federal law enforcement agencies, overseeing a behavior detection program that used to operate within the mall. When they would see unusual behaviors that are outside the mall's baseline, they would conduct security interviews of those customers to work out, are they a threat to the Mall of America? And actually, it was here when I was at Mall America that I was talking at a conference, a sports conference down in Disney, when a local police department reached out to me and said, Simon, we know you're a Christian, we know you're foreign law enforcement, and we know you're at Mall of America. Can you come and educate this church around safety and security? And I went there one Wednesday evening. I remember two things, that the Lord really put it on my heart to help his churches stay safe. And second, I realized that there was a real need for biblically based security risk management. And since that time, I've gone on to help thousands of nonprofit organizations across America. Now, I've also spent a bit of time when I left Mall of America. I've also spent 8 years in financial risk compliance, rising to the level of director, some of the largest finance institutions in the country, overseeing risk management, business continuity, crisis management, vendor assurance. How do we deal with our vendors? So many different facets of risk in and around financial risk I have an experience on. There I've written opinion pieces and been featured in the Wall Street Journal in the bottom left. And there's an organization called the Violence Project, which I really recommend that you check out. Another fellow Brit here with me in Minnesota, Dr. James Densley and Dr. Gillian Peterson, they have researched every mass shooting in the US from 1966 to the current day, of which was over 180 where 4 or more people have been killed. They wrote the award-winning book, The Violence Project, of which some of my work on conversational interviewing features within their book. And my main organization today is Kingswood Security Consulting, where we provide risk management services for primarily houses of worship and non-profits, but we do some for-profit work. And on my church arm, I have a training company called the Worship Security Academy, which is online learning dedicated to houses of worship for staff and volunteers. So I've got an extensive background in and around the subject that we're going to talk about today. Now, maybe when you look at the screen, how you currently deal with threats within your church could be like this bullseye here, this dartboard, wherever we might call it, where you might feel that how you recognize threats is a little bit scattered. How you analyze threats is a little bit scattered, and how you respond to threats is a little bit scattered. So my goal today is to take the scatteredness, if that is such a word, that you have at your church and make you more focused so you can start hitting that bullseye or close to the bullseye each time. So you're following a process to evaluate the threats that you might have at your house of worship that could cause harm to individuals. But let's start off talking first about, well, what is threat assessment and threat management? And this quote is taken from an organization called the Association of Threat Assessment Professionals. And at the very end, I'm going to tell you a little bit more about who they are. I recommend that you try and join that organization. But threat assessment is based on investigation. So investigation being a key word to determine if a person is moving towards an act of violence, and if so, how can they be redirected or prevented? So we're in a house of worship. So I'm going to tell you here, we're going to redirect that person through our programs, or we're going to try and prevent and engage them before they escalate to a point of action. So threat assessment is a fact-based method, which is an investigation to determine if a person is moving towards an act of violence. So what is then workplace violence, Simon? We hear a lot of the term of workplace violence, but what does this mean? Well, this is taken from ASIS, which is an American Security Association, and they define it as a spectrum of behaviors, including violence, threats, and other conduct that generates a reasonable concern for someone's safety. So again, we're going to focus on someone's behaviors now are escalating to, we have a concern either for my safety or for the safety of others. And through this threat assessment process, we're going to work out, well, how do we respond to those threats and how do we assess them to know, is this person coming to a church to cause us harm, or are they coming seeking God's grace? And we're going to dive into that a little bit more. So let's start off then with some key concepts around threat assessment. So here we're going to ask ourselves a key question, and this might need to be reframed from what you thought you would ask before, and it's slightly different now. We're going to say to ourselves, does the situation pose a threat? Not did the person make a threat? Because we're going to look deeper now. We're going to look into their human behaviors, because nobody just snaps. You know, we might hear of these active violence cases on the news. There is always a trigger. And there is actually a sequential series of events. There's this pathway to violence that active assailants go through. And through those sequential events, they give us observable, noticeable behaviors. But if we can see them before, we can try and give that person help before they escalate to the point of crisis, because there is a noticeable crisis point. So it's here in a church where we can really interject and come alongside those individuals. So we're going to look here now at stressors. So these are things that can cause escalated emotions. These are things that can cause workplace violence. These are things that can cause threats to be made against the church. These things like mental health issues. It could be someone who is off medication or is undiagnosed with mental illness. Financial strain, the loss of a job, low unemployment, the house close to being repossessed, not being able to make payments on key bills, you know, financial strain, marital problems, divorce, separation, child custody battles, alcohol or drug abuse, chemical dependency, you know, someone who could be in the criminal or civil justice system, the death of a loved one, family disputes. I think we can say that on the left-hand side, we can all raise our hand and say we've all been in crisis in one form or another in our lives. And it's these stressors that can cause that pathway to violence. And each one of these stressors has their own unique set of behaviors. But if we see them before, again, we can intervene, we can disrupt that pathway and give the people support that's needed. On the right-hand side, we have inhibitors. So these are the things that stop someone who's highly agitated, who's highly distressed, who might not be thinking rationally. The inhibitors, these are the things that stop them from carrying out an act of violence. So we've got, a supportive family, a social support network, men that are engaged in a men's Bible group, and they're feeling like, they've not seen their son in 6 months. They're feeling like the only way to get him back is to go to the preschool and confront them with aggression. They've got a supportive network. A church men's group saying, Simon, is that the right thing that you really need to do? These that can see, make them see, get to rational thinking, to move from the right side of the brain, emotional, to the left side of the brain, logic. So the inhibitors are just things that prevent that person escalating to the point of action. So we're going to talk through now 4 steps to solve the threat assessment puzzle. So we're at the point where behaviors may escalate to the point of action, and a threat has been received, a human threat has been received or is perceived. And what we're now going to do is look at, well, how do we build a program which is going to help us address this key area? Now, the first thing that we need to do is we actually need to develop a threat assessment protocol. So we need to work out, well, what's it going to look like in our church to assessing threats? And we call this the threat assessment protocol. And again, I said in these slides, there's no real sexy pictures. There's just a lot of text. But if you stay to the end, I'll explain how you can have access to the slide decks, believing it will help you. But I'm going to take you through step by step. So we need to develop our protocol. So the first we're going to do is we're going to gather information. So we're talking about a protocol. Really, I'm talking about a policy, a procedure, a handbook, wherever you want to start. We're talking about outlining a protocol for the threat assessment process. This could be how you're going to gather information concerning the individual, their background, their behavior, potential motivations for violence. Within this process, we're going to just outline, well, what are the steps for gathering that information? I would mostly go as strong and say, even in a church, you want to call it an investigation. We're going to information gather. We're going to investigate. So, what does that protocol look like? What do you want your teams to go through, which is a consistent, repeatable process in how you're going to gather information about the threat? The second thing that we have is within our protocol, we're just going to include, well, how are we going to evaluate the risk posed by the individual? Consider factors such as, again, their behavior, weapons, and any history of violence. In this section here, all we are doing is starting to build our sort of policy, our procedure handbook, whatever you want to call it. Initially, I'm just going to say just create this written framework as to what it looks like. But we are going to talk about how we're going to assess the threat which we've received. The next thing we're going to talk about is the risk management. Now, the protocol is going to outline the steps for managing the risk posed by the individual. We're going to go into detail in some of these a bit moments, so don't worry too much if you're writing this stuff down, and we're going to go into detail. But it's steps to how we're going to intervene as a faith community, how we're going to monitor, how we're going to refer them to appropriate resources. Now, next we have the collaboration. So your protocol should encourage collaboration and communication by all members of your threat assessment team. That might include law enforcement, mental health practitioners, social workers, community partners, other members of your church, but you're going to find those people that you need to collaborate with during this process. And then the next thing that should be within your protocol is your requirements for documentation. I'm going to touch on this a bit later, but who made the decisions? How was the decision made? What information was assessed? What information was gathered? And then what is your risk management plan? So that is the first thing that we want to do, is create this framework around the threat assessment process. Don't have to be too complex. Don't overthink it. But once I've taken you through these next components, you'll be able to go back and fill in the gaps. But we do need to create some type of protocol around how this threat assessment team is going to work. So we've got our protocol. You'll be able to use some of these future slides to help you develop that protocol. But the next thing we need to do is to build a multidisciplinary threat assessment team so we can actually evaluate those threats that come into our church. We need a team that can do this. So the first thing that we need to do is determine the team's purpose. Now, you might call this a mission statement if you like, but I'm a great believer, because we are ministry, in really defining what is the purpose, what is the mission behind having this threat assessment team. Now, you will know what it looks like at your house of worship. Maybe there's some scripture in there, but we are going to assess threats against individuals who are in crisis, who are struggling, and that need our help right now to draw them closer to the Lord. So just sort of define your team's purpose, create this mission statement that this organization isn't about reporting on people, it isn't about spying on people. The threat assessment team is about helping those key individuals that could be displaying behaviors that might indicate there's going to be harm. So think about what is the mission and the purpose of your threat assessment team, and then write that down. So the next thing that we have, number 2, is then identifying your team. Now, we use the word multidisciplinary. Now, if we are going to assess threats where a person's behavior has escalated to the point where we question ourselves as to, are we safe, or is our church community safe? we need to have a wide array of people that sits on this threat assessment team. So on here we have law enforcement professionals. Maybe there's a retired law enforcement officer who comes to your church. Maybe there's someone who's active serving that can sit on your team. Mental health practitioners. I think most of us would agree that if someone is escalated to the point of frustration and there is a perceived threat against our safety or that of others, that there's more than likely some mental illness which is driving those behaviors behind the scenes. So finding some mental health practitioners that can be on your team and offer perspective is going to help you. And perhaps there's maybe that someone works in risk management, within financial risk compliance, within governance, within healthcare. You might find a risk management specialist who's used and comfortable to assessing information to draw conclusions as to, is this person here seeking God's grace, or do we need to be concerned that their behavior might be a safety concern of that of the church? So creating your multidisciplinary team, you're going to identify the best skills and abilities that you already have. And I'm sure as I'm talking now, you're thinking of key individuals, knowing that we're talking about individuals that are in crisis or of concern as to what is going to give you the most well-rounded team members. So then the next thing we need to do, so we've got our protocol, we've determined the types of people and skills we want on our multidisciplinary team. We now need to go and recruit those individuals. So we're going to reach out to them and say, Simon, we are creating this threat assessment team at our church, and we want it to be multidisciplinary. We know that you work in mental health, particularly around those in crisis with addiction, or though we know that you work in mental illness for those with bipolar, whatever it is. We would love for you to be on this new team, because as we get threats, we're going to try and understand them and quantify them to know, could that be a threat for the church? And then how does the church respond? We would love it if you would come and join that team. Here's one of the things that you must do when you're thinking about recruiting is we've got to think about what is the time commitment and be realistic. So make sure that you're having a conversation with someone. Hey, this is only when someone's human behavior bubbles up to the point of concern. Then we're going to get together as a team. We're going to discuss what we need to do. And do we perceive that to be a real threat? So recruit those people for your team. You'll find them within your church body. I'm very confident. You just need to determine who are those best people and start having those conversations. Now, the next thing we need to do with a multidisciplinary team, and some of these you'll need to listen to all the sort of strategies and then come back and fill in the blanks, because some of what you're going to train them to is going to be into your protocol and also in relation to another strategy that I'm going to share with you in a few moments. The worst thing that we do in houses of worship, if I'm very, very honest, is that we throw people into positions without training and without expectation as what it is that we want that person to do. So when we recruit these people, we're going to have already created our protocol. We're going to determine what we need to train them in, how to assess threat protocols, how to gather the information. What is that? I use the word investigation, and it really is. What does that investigation look like in gathering that information? And then some of those risk management strategies. So once we've gathered the information, we've done an assessment, what are those strategies that are available to us to make sure that everyone is kept safe when we are concerned about a key individual? So we've got to make sure that we're offering training so they know what the expectation is of them. Now, the next component that we have is the threat assessment process. So now we may have seen behaviors that escalate to the point of concern, or someone's brought those concerns to us. We're going to now talk about, well, how do we assess those threats where we can make a decision on what it is that we need to do. And this is a little bit repeated from earlier, but it's the same process now. We're going to gather all relevant information about the individual of concern, including their background, the behavior, any history of violence, all circumstances, and we're really doing a mini investigation. We're going to gather the facts, we're going to gather the information before we can assess it. We need to make sure we've asked all the right questions. So let's make sure we're going to gather all the information. The next stage is then to identify the risk factors. Most often, we're asking ourselves, we hear the threat, but does this person have the means? Do they have the means and access to do what they say they are doing? So the risk factors can be looked at two ways. The first is that we're going to identify those risk factors that may increase the likelihood of violence, and this includes weapons, history of substance abuse, history of alcoholism, chemical dependency, a pattern of escalating behavior. We're going to look at all this, and then we're going to say, and where's the means? Can Simon come here and do this? Well, Simon lives in California. We're here in Minnesota. Does he have the means to get here and carry out the threat which is being disclosed to the church, or what we believe we're concerned for his behavior? So we're really going to dive in here now and say, hey, what is everything that we know? So the next key piece then is about evaluating the risks. So we've gathered the information. We now have to determine what path is it that we're going to take. So we're going to use the information gathered, identify those risk factors, and we've got to evaluate the level of risk posed by the individual. Now, this may involve using a standardized assessment tool. Now, I would imagine, depending on the size of your church, even a lot of my mega churches, and some of you may even be on this webinar, I'm sure a lot of you are thinking, well, Simon, we don't have a standardized assessment tool. And again, if you stick around to the end, I'll tell you how you can get access to this presentation, and you can just copy this down. This is a very, very simple tool that you can use to try and work out where are we on the assessment, because we've got to reach a decision here, guys. We've got to reach a decision based on what we know, good, bad, indifferent, but to decide is to decide, and making a decision needs to be corroborated with the facts. So on the screen, we are just seeing a very simple matrix, likelihood versus impact. Now, you can, if you wanted to, you can go round each individual who is on your threat assessment team, and you can say, Simon, when you look at all the information, how likely is it that this is going to occur? Oh, well, actually, I think that it's most probably unlikely that David is going to come and do this right now based on everything we know. Okay, so we're going to say unlikely. And if David was to come and carry out what he says he's going to do, what do you think the impact would be? Oh, I think that would be most probably moderate if he did that. So we can then see that we've got the yellow box, unlikely and moderate. We join them together, and we can really see, for me, that is like a yellowish color box. So as you look at this sort of what could be your standardized tool, you've got very low, which is green, moderate sort of amber, you've got like an orange, which is high, and then you've got red, which is critical. You can standardize by simply evaluating the facts against this matrix, working out where might this threat be, what is our concern, what is the person's means, and then you can choose a box. And here now, as we talk in the future, we can then consult with experts and say, this is the story on our risk matrix, this is where we think the person is, and we're going to consult with professionals, because you might need to talk to law enforcement, you might need to talk to mental health practitioners, you might need to get a broader perspective on the risk, and then ultimately we're going to move into building our risk management plan. So by going, let me go back a second. So by going to our standardized tool, it can be very simple. We know where we have categorized the risk. That's what we're really doing here. We're going to consult with experts. That's going to then allow us to say, well, what is our response? And the beauty of having a matrix, very simple, is that you can try to build a framework. Again, going back to your protocol, remember a lot of this stuff is overlapping. You can go back to your protocol and you can say, for something which is green, here's some standard responses. If it's in the moderate, here's some standard responses. If it's in the very high, here's some standard responses. And that's what we're going to talk about now, is building your risk management plan. So you've gathered the facts, you've categorized the threat, the risk. Now this is our risk management plan. So here, we need to implement safety measures. And most often that is safety measures that are going to secure the church. And these could be things like trespassing the individual. We're going to take responsibility and we're going to trespass the individual so they're no longer welcome at the church to try and keep people safe. It could be issuing a non-contact order against key individuals. It could be increasing your physical security, but during the day, the church has 5 entrances and you leave them open. We're going to close the church down and you're going to have to use our intercom to get in just for the period while we get through this escalated risk. Or it could also be, remember, we are a house of worship. We support those who are broken. It could be that you're going to refer the person to some type of treatment program, some type of third-party support. But here in this section, we're really talking about how do we resolve the situation. The situation has been identified. We've gathered the information. We've assessed it against our risk matrix. Now, what are those steps are we going to do to keep the community safe? And the first one is implement those safety measures. The second one could be that you're going to monitor the individual. And again, in a house of worship, some of this could be new, it could be foreign, it could be challenged. What I would say here is that we are not reporting on someone. This is someone that we want to help. Remember, we're doing threat assessment because we're concerned with their actions, their behaviors, or their spoken word that we feel that they could cause harm in our environment. And we've got to find a way to assess that risk. And we've got to find a way to monitor that risk. So if you want the person to still come to your church and worship, it could be that you monitor them by having someone on your church safety team sit down next to them. It could be that you have someone on your church safety team sit a few pews away from them and monitor what they do. So if they do escalate, you're in a position to respond. It could be that you're going to monitor their Facebook and their Instagram to see if they're making any abnormal or unusual statements. It could be that you're going to ask them to check in when they arrive. You are still welcome at the church. However, we require you to tell someone when you're on site so we know that you are here. So we're going to monitor the individual. The next thing we're going to do, and again, this is easy for us within the church because we are a house of brokenness, but we believe that everyone can be saved by bringing them closer to the Lord. We're going to offer them support and resources to that individual. It could be, as I mentioned earlier, mental health. It could be crisis intervention programs. It could be financial help. It could just be walking alongside that person's journey. But we're going to provide them the support needed and resources to be successful because, again, we've got someone who is in crisis and we are concerned with their behavior. But we're not going to abandon them as a church. We're going to perhaps walk alongside them. It could even be at a distance, but we're going to walk alongside that individual to help keep them safe. And then lastly, within this program, again, we're in the risk management here. We've created our program. We've monitored Simon. Someone on the safety team is going to sit close to Simon. And we're going to require Simon tells us when he comes to the church. We are still going to work with our collaboration partners. Again, remember, this is a multidisciplinary threat assessment team. We're going to collaborate with our partners to make sure, is there anything else that we need to be doing to help this key individual? So we're going to be collaborating there. And then the final piece in that risk management process is we see the threat, the risk. We have discussed it. We've categorized it now using my very simple matrix. We've determined our course of action. Someone will sit next to Simon when he comes to church. We require Simon to check in and let us know when he's arriving at church. The final piece, and a crucial piece, is to document that story. Now, here's the thing I'm going to say, and hopefully this isn't taken as a swear word on a Christian webinar, but you are damned if you do and damned if you don't. If you don't have a documented sort of process as to how you reach your conclusion, you're going to be taken to the coals. If you do have one and something goes wrong or it's different, people are going to say, well, your plan wasn't good enough. However, you need the documentation, because you can say, well, we met on February 8th, we discussed our concerns, we reached a mitigation strategy, we reached a risk management strategy, we took X, Y, and Z, and here we documented it. So they can't challenge the process that you've gone through if you've documented the process. So it's really, really important to record how you got there. And then the next thing we're going to do is then we're going to rinse and repeat everything that I told you today. We're going to, each time we get some behavior that escalates to the point of concern, each time we need to activate our threat assessment team, we're going to go through the same process. We're going to gather information. We're going to gather all that information. We're going to do our risk management strategy. We're going to assess it against our matrix. And as a result of that assessment, it's come out as very high. We're going to do X, Y, and Z. As a result of our assessment, it came out as moderate, which means we're going to do 1, 2, 3. We're going to work with our collaborators, and then we're going to document that entire process. And then we're going to rinse and repeat every time we get some behavior which escalates to the point of concern within the church. We're going to rinse and repeat. Now, I'm going to take us through a case study now to tie all this together. And this was of the First Baptist Church in Sutherland Springs, Texas, in 2017, where 26 people lost their lives. One of those was a young soul, where one of the victims was pregnant. Now, the perpetrator is where we're going to focus a lot of our attention in relation to this attack. I want to tell you a little bit about who this gentleman was. So, in high school, he had disciplinary problems. He joined the Air Force, where he was convicted for domestic assault, death threats to superiors, self-harm, brought illegal firearms onto the base, threatened his wife with a gun, threatened to kill his wife's family, convicted in military court, and had a bad conduct discharge. Now, after the military, his behaviors continued, accused of sexual and physical assault, accused of mistreatment of animals. We all know what psychologists say about those that hurt animals. He was described as creepy and angry, and was claimed to have purchased animals for target practice, and he became very vocally anti-religious, including online. Now, before the Sunday where his perpetrator attended and took 26 human souls, there was a behavior before which also caused concern. Now, he expressed obsession with the mass murders, including the Charleston church shooting, where in 2015, 9 people lost their lives at the hands of an armed gunman. And he actually joked about committing mass murder. And before the shooting, he posted a picture of himself on Facebook holding a rifle. And around a week before the attack, he attended a full festival at the First Baptist Church, all wearing black, was so concerning for people that they observed him, said he was acting strangely, and someone actually examined him, searched him to make sure he wasn't carrying a gun. That is how concerned they were about his behavior. Now, ironically, his ex-mother-in-law was known to attend the First Baptist Church, and on the morning of the attack, he was sending her threatening text messages, most probably expecting to find her at the church. So this is a little bit about his life here. So we can see, there's a lot of crisis points in his life. Now, I want to take us to the stairway, if you like, the pathway to violence. Now, can you see the elements of the pathway to violence? Can you see how over a period of time, his behaviors were getting more severe, were getting more clear that all is not well? Was there any behaviors in that story that were concerning to you? And what about the presence of stressors? Did you see any stressors? The divorce, the anger towards his ex-wife, all these things going on. It's very clear when you look at that story, you can see the pathway to violence where this person was going through. Now, what's interesting here, and again, you can either take a screenshot of this, or at the end, I'll tell you how you're going to get access to the slides. This is a very simple way that you can use in your risk management tool to say, hey, do we see any of these here? And I've just ticked a few as examples. We've got a history of threats or violent acts, including threats of violence, including occurring during employment. Threats, bullying, other threatening behavior, all these things. If you keep this list, you can tick this list as part of your risk management tool to say, this is going to help us determine the qualifier as to how we then respond. So when you look at this sort of tick box, you can see the things that I've just ticked on here that this gentleman had going from. Most probably a lot of those boxes could have been ticked in this situation. So I really wanted to show you that there is a way, even just with one person, that you can assess threats, that you can draw them to a conclusion, and that you can do that in a very structured and documented way. Now, as we start to wrap up the webinar, I just want to summarize where we have been so far. So the first one was about developing a threat assessment protocol. So now you've listened to the entire webinar. I really hope that you feel empowered, that you can write a handbook, a process, a policy, but just put a framework around what does the threat assessment process look like at your house of worship that you want people to follow. The second was building a multidisciplinary threat assessment team, finding 4 to 5 key individuals, law enforcement, mental illness, someone that works with those in crisis outreach, perhaps, ministerial team. Maybe there's a law enforcement officer within your church, ask them to be on there. Use this multidisciplinary team that they can then go through the threat assessment process using that very simple matrix that I showed you. Where are they? Likelihood and the impact. That'll get you a color. From the color, you can put a framework around how are we then going to respond, which leads us on to the fourth point, building your risk management plan. Most of these things you can structure in such a way that it's repeatable to know that if someone is in the red, we automatically we do these 4 things. If someone was in the amber, we do these things. It'll make it so much easier for you and repeatable if you build your risk management plan and then document. Remember, you will be damned if you do, damned if you don't. However, if you follow these 4 steps, you will have a very robust threat assessment protocol, and you would have documented your decision. Your decision won't be able to be challenged because there was a concern about someone's behavior escalating to a point of action. You then called your threat assessment team together. You then gathered all the information, you researched, you understood the threat picture, you determined the risk, the likelihood, and you put it on that chart. You put it on the matrix. Here is where the person is. Then you built your risk management plan to keep people safe. Now, I mentioned a little bit at the beginning about giving you some resources, and there's quite a few things out there that will help you on your journey. First, I really recommend that you check out the Association of Threat Assessment Professionals, and the link is on the right-hand side. This is a really great group of threat assessment professionals from all different sectors, not just non-profits, but they're all committed for the common goal of being able to assess threats. You'll get a lot of learning, a lot of networking, and they also host a couple of yearly conferences. To find your local chapter. There's some information on here online that you can go down and prints from the FBI, some great white papers talking about threat assessment and understanding violence before it escalates to action. And lastly, I mentioned a few times, if you want access to these slides, like I said, I didn't put any fluffy pictures in. It was just giving you the words and the format to follow. If you want access to these slides, please just send my team an email at team@kingswoodsc.com and use the word slides, and my team will get those to you within the next few days. So want to finish by saying that really grateful for Worship Facility for inviting me to talk you through this on this webinar. It is a subject which often can appear complex. It can often put people off starting, but if we go back to the myths that I covered and then the actual factual stuff, is that hopefully if you follow the process, it could be you as one person doing this, but there is a way for you to acknowledge that this is a risk of concern, but you can take yourself through the information gathering, finding out everything you can about the means, the access to weapons, their mental illness. What have they actually said? What do they actually do which of concern? If you gather all that information, if you just use that simple matrix that I told you, the likelihood versus impact, and then say, okay, now we know this, now we know they're here on this matrix. What is it that we are going to do? Talk, collaborate, find your partner. So again, thank you for joining me. If you would want access to the slide decks, please send my team an email to team@kingswoodsc.com. And again, I'm Simon Osamoh, the founder of Kingswood Security Consulting, and I've been really grateful that you've taken some time out of your busy day to join me today. So take care, everybody. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Simon. I think this is an important topic and people have learned a lot. Thank you for watching our webinar today. As always, if you have any questions, you can contact me at glast@worshipfacility.com. I can answer any questions you have. And if you have questions for Simon, he'll answer them as well. Thank you again for attending and have a good day.